Hey everyone, this is Justin with Play with Reason, and last week I had a chance to drop a video about famous authors taking the writing test. Had so much fun making it and putting it out there, and your comments and feedbacks and shares, oh my gosh, thank you so much. Very, very much appreciated. There were a couple questions out there, and so I wanted to see if I could address those and see if I could answer them. They evolved around like, what was the satirical piece? Was there any truth behind it? What was the inspiration? Just kind of fun stuff. So what I thought I would do is a process called creative articulation. Now don't hang up. It's actually a really powerful term, and I want you to think about it this way. Have you ever asked anyone to think outside the box or to be creative? Well, we do that all the time as teachers, and especially with new minds, we even ask our own teachers to, be creative and then have your kids be creative. But the problem becomes if you are saying be creative to the kids and you are the end-all be-all, right? You're the judgment. The kids will be creative up until a point where it matches your definition of creativity. So, for example, if you believe that lots of colors make something creative, if you think, really random shapes make something creative, then the kids who are drawing to match your definition will draw, guess what? Lots of colors and random shapes. So, creative articulation still encourages kids to be creative. It still gives them the tools to do that. But instead, when the kid turned in the project, you ask, hey, what did you put into this? What made this creative? What do you like about this? And the kid has to articulate, the student has to articulate what made this piece creative. So it's just really kind of a neat way to do it. It's called creative articulation. A lot of research behind it. We love it as a company. And so that's what I'm going to do here. And so let me see if I get this thing queued up. I guess before I hit play, I should say this. To answer that first question, this is inspired and based on a true story. I was a writing teacher for numerous years inside of a traditional classroom. Loved it by the way. So the persona you see me playing in this one of the frustrated teacher is not entirely true. But what is true is this, is that I was asked to teach a course that was called Writing Tutorials, right? It was to help kids that were at risk of not passing the state writing test. And so it was funny because the state writing test at the time, there are two parts to it, and one of them was to write a narrative where it could only take 4 hours total for the test, and it had to be done in one page with 26 lines on it. Many teachers will hear that and just start to shake, like 26 lines. So that's the standard page that they would give you, and that's how much space the kids had to write on. And so that part is true. The part that I taught in a class called Writing Tutorials, the fact that they were kids that were identified as being at risk. And then ultimately what I was asking them to do was to create an entire narrative, entire story, all on 26 lines. So let me hit play because just dive in here. So yeah, so that became the question is like, man, so what famous authors actually had to take this writing test? How would they have responded to it? And so what you'll see here is James Joyce. I can scoot forward here a little bit. James Joyce is the first one to show up. And reason he shows up first is he's kind of the inspiration behind it. He has a quote, and I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, or if it's attributed to him, but I always attribute it to him. It's his friend asked him, how did writing go today? And he would talk about how sometimes he would spend the whole day writing and only get a couple sentences out. Think about that. This is James Joyce, right? Finnegan's Wake. Now this is actually his quote. Is that it took him 17 years to write Finnegan's Wake, and it's going to take you 17 years to read it. So why do I bring all that up? Is because this guy, it took him all day to write 2 sentences. It took him 17 years to write a book. So now you can see where this is coming together. What would have happened if James Joyce had been asked to write a whole story in 4 hours on a 26-line paper? So I'll just say here too, there's Mark Twain. I didn't intend for him to be quite so silly or have such a southern drawl. But man, he just became a blast. And that's a shot of Florida, Mississippi there behind. Florida. Oh, and that part, of course, is an inside joke. The part about my name. It is Vodder with a V, but gosh, if you have any kind of name that has an odd spelling like that, you have probably had it mispronounced and butchered. Probably by me in class. But yeah, Wouters, all those got Walters, all those. Yeah, so Kurt Vonnegut has shown up, and there's a little tit for tat here, which I think is pretty funny. There's a spot where Kurt Vonnegut and Mark Twain get into an argument about what makes, character, man versus nature, and all that kind of stuff. Let me see if I can scoot forward. But the point is that they did actually have kind of antithetical opinions about what about nature. And so Kurt Vonnegut had this whole part about, like, if you think nature's your enemy or something like that, then you don't need a friend. I can't remember the quote exactly. I say it in there. But of course, it's in direct disagreement with Mark Twain. He was like, man, nature's the greatest teacher. But what I found so interesting is that even though they conflicted, I had a chance to throw this little factoid in there. Kurt Vonnegut named his son after Mark Twain. And so if you listen closely, there's a part where he goes, I respect you. I respect you. I named my son after you. And so, yeah, he actually did. So it's kind of a neat little insight there. Some fun. What else? Okay, so Ronald Dahl has showed up. Rolled. And so that was interesting for me, is actually I've been saying it wrong my whole life. I actually got to the scene of writing this and the whole part about taking roll, and I was like, man, how do you say rolled, right? And I was just guessing. So I looked it up, and yeah, it's rolled. It's a silent D. And so you hear Kurt almost having the same reaction I did, like, silent D. The last part I'll say there is that actually behind him is the actual part of Ireland where they shot, what was it, a BFG, the newest make of BFG. It might be the only make of BFG, but if you haven't seen it, it's beautiful. Did a great job just kind of capturing Roald Dahl and his imaginative world. So just really awesome. Okay, let me see if I can scoot forward here a little bit. And you know what? I do want to say while I'm here, the whole part about them talking at the same time, all these little quotes are embedded in there from the actual authors themselves. And I think the person that got robbed the most in this whole thing is Jorge, right? Because he has incredible quotes. But it was intentional. It wasn't intentional to rob Jorge of his amazing quotes, but it's intentional to have all the characters talking at the same time. Some movies that I grew up with that I liked a whole lot were like The Goonies, for example. So, I love The Goonies for many, many reasons, but one in particular is that I feel they have captured the way that kids actually talk to each other better than almost any other movie I can think of. On that same vein might be like Stand By Me, right? But my point is, or The Sandlot. The Sandlot's another great one too. So not only are they great movies, but also you have all these kids that are all talking at the same time. If you haven't seen them in a while, go back and watch it. It's like who can shout over the other one the loudest. And man, if you have ever taught a classroom, if you have ever, you'd chaperone a field trip for Pete's sake. That's just the way the kids communicate, right? They're all talking at the same time. They're talking over each other. It's who can talk the loudest. And yeah, of course, when adults come in and regulate, then you get like the talking sticks or taking turns and stuff like that. But just this natural dialogue of kids. And so watching my own kids talk, it's the same thing. Guys, hey guys. And you hear the youngest one like repeat that at least like 15 times before they get anyone's attention. So it's almost this marketplace of ideas and conversations. So I wanted that same kind of approach to come into this. What if you had a whole bunch of genius writers that got together, that all had something to say, right? Like, especially Jorge, man. Such good quotes. All talking at the same time, all trying to share their thoughts and opinions. And so he intentionally is in front of a bookshelf. And just know that, Mark Twain's mustache, for example, is made out of a brown paper bag. And his wig is like a witch wig from Halloween. It was all I had, man. Costume shops aren't exactly open right now. So just a chance to grab stuff and record. Okay. Now, yeah, I do want to say this. This is actually the way that prompts are put together. So you'll have a picture. And so, for example, this lady in a canoe, and then write about a time that you faced adversity. And this is the prompt that's handed to the kids. They don't have to write about a canoe per se, but they do have to address that prompt. Okay, so the funny part there is that a lot of kids, and I would argue probably even adults, but again, I've worked with kids, they will get this prompt and they'll see the boat, and they'll see the kid in the boat, or the lady in the boat, and they'll see the quote, or they'll see the prompt, right? And what they'll do is they'll write their whole story around a time that they were on a river. And again, if there's a writing teacher out there, like, they're probably dying laughing because that is so true. Kids look at this see Lady in the Boat. So they write a story about the boat. And this is kind of why Mark Twain, he goes, it has to be about a riverboat. So that part is true. That is the exact way that the prompts are delivered and the way they have to write. Now, obviously for a writer or people who love writing, making a mistake or, writing about adversity, like that's easy stuff. Like those are prompts that you're like, oh man, I've got a plethora of things that I could grab to write about that. But then, of course, try to fit it into a personal narrative on 26 lines. Onto that riverboat part, I think this probably answers the last question of how this was filmed. So if you notice, like some of the green screens didn't quite work out super great. I'm using WeVideo and a webcam, so I didn't have enough not an editor, I guess enough high pixelation or resolution to get the green screen to come off on some of those, like Kurt's and James. But the other ones I was able to put some kind of a background in there. So they're all shot in the same spot here, right, at the office. And the way they were done, this is half the fun of it, is I recorded the teacher's lines first. So I recorded Mr. Vodder, and he would take kind of awkward pauses and wait a little bit. And then he would jump back in, like, Mr. Volta, right? so he would, just Vodder. So I recorded that all by myself, just kind of waiting and making kind of awkward time pauses. And then what I would do is I would, adorn my amazing costume skills, right? And put on my my brown bag, mustache. And I would have the audio playing. I'd have the audio playing from the original teacher. And then I would record that guy's piece. So I would record like Mark Twain, for example. And I think actually I recorded in the order that showed up. So James Joyce was recorded first, and then Mark Twain, then Shakespeare, then Kurt. So I had a script done, but the neat part is because there were different pauses in there, that allowed me to ad-lib things. So, I mean, Mark Twain has a lot of ad-lib stuff, and in particular, and so does Kurt Vonnegut actually, but one part I like is that part I just mentioned. The whole part about, it's got to be about a riverboat. That was totally ad-lib because the pause was so long that it allowed him to fill that space in there. And then there is a part where Mr. Vodder gets mad, starts to get frustrated and says that's what you're here for. And that part was not ad-lib. That's the part I want to make sure I highlight. Kurt Vonnegut has a line where he goes, "We're here to fart around." And that's an actual Kurt Vonnegut quote. Okay. Let me see if I can take it here to the end. Anything else? That answers all your questions. You guys have been so great. I hope this has been enjoyable for you to kind of see the thought process behind it. Again, James Joyce is the inspiration. And I guess I should probably end by going to the quote here at the very, very end. Because I took some liberties, I'm sure, with the context there. Obviously, James Joyce, in all of his struggle in his 17 years to write this book, says, writing in English is the most ingenious torture ever devised for sins committed in previous lives. So he is just struggling and pushing so hard to get, like I said earlier, 2 sentences out per day, to get this book written in 17 years so that it actually works and it translates. And I took this quote and said, writing in English class, right, is the most ingenious torture ever devised for sins committed in previous lives. So I want to make sure I'm clear on that part. I love being a teacher. I love teaching writing. I love to write. And I think that's why I was able to broach this topic and have fun with it, because it's that question of like, okay, so what are we teaching exactly? What is creativity, right? Coming back to the whole piece. And are we trying to force these kids to write inside of, like, unfair parameters? What would happen if we took some of the most famous authors, some of the most prolific and best authors, and asked them to write inside these parameters? How would they respond to it? So, man, thanks again. My name is Justin, and this is with Play with Reason with New Minds Enrichment. If you haven't noticed, this is my chance to kind of play around and test new things out and new formats and new feels and flavor. By all means, let me know what you're enjoying, what you like, and I'm going to keep playing with reason, have some fun. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.